This episode of Retrosaurus is brought to you by Nicholas Topher. Come unleash the bees on Twitch and YouTube. Hi, welcome back to Retrosaurus. My name is Louie, and today we're going to uncover the legacy of Final Fantasy VII. Now that Final Fantasy VII Remake has been in gamers' hands for a couple weeks now, that's if you were lucky enough to get a copy 10 days prior to release, looking at you Australia, it's time to look back on how the original Final Fantasy VII became its own entity within the greater Final Fantasy franchise and a powerhouse series all on its own. At its release, Final Fantasy VII was easily one of the most successful JRPGs around with mainstream appeal and helped solidify PlayStation's hold on the console market during the 90s. So, it's only natural that Square Enix, formerly known as Squaresoft at the time of the original's release, would revisit this wildly popular title time and time again. They created additional installments within the expanded universe known as the Compilation of Final Fantasy VII. This included 3 additional games, a feature-length film, and a short OVA anime tie-in to supplement and expand the existing storyline and characters. As with any sequelized form of media, more entries meant more lore, more convoluted storylines, and more plot holes and retcons that almost seemed to necessitate a remake to make sense of it all. So grab your Buster Sword, set your materia, and do some squats as we return to the livestream to uncover the legacy of this legendary title. Before we jump into Final Fantasy VII, let's first explain what makes a JRPG for those uninitiated with the genre, as games within it have incredible variance and unique gameplay styles despite being under the same umbrella. Japanese-style role-playing games, affectionately simplified to JRPGs, are a genre of games that take heavy inspiration from tabletop games such as Dungeons & Dragons. There isn't a single defining description for this genre, as styles can range from turn-based to action-based, even expanding to include non-traditional gameplay styles. It's not uncommon to borrow elements from other genres as well, such as shooters, strategy games, and even crafting sims. However, elements such as character classes, experience points, leveling up attributes, and learning skills are commonly found in all of these games. Some games can be grindy in nature and require you to fight enemies and myriad encounters to grow your characters. Now, how these elements are implemented and even transformed are sometimes unique to a certain game. The Final Fantasy franchise itself has a unique interpretation for most of these elements in nearly every installment. They tend to differ quite a bit from their Western counterparts, as they are steeped in storytelling tropes and linear design that are staples of Japanese games. Many, but not all of these games follow the same simple premise. A young man from a small rural town finds that he's destined to be the savior of the world and heads off on his fantastical adventure, visiting exotic locales, making new friends, and sealing the evil once and for all. These games tend to be narrative heavy, though there are many whose story is mostly there as a backdrop to keep you invested in the grindy nature of the battle systems. And don't get me wrong, I love me a good grindy JRPG where I can just zone out and level up my characters while jamming out to classic battle themes. However, once in a blue moon, we get a game that takes this premise and shakes it up, and looks to the future to tell a more modern, relatable story. And that game was Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII was released on January 31st, 1997 in Japan as a PlayStation brand exclusive, where it would remain until an HD re-release in 2019 would bring it to the Nintendo and Microsoft consoles for the first time. This was the first main series Final Fantasy title to release on a non-Nintendo console, despite the company being synonymous with the Nintendo brand during the SNES days. Squaresoft would continue to produce games exclusively for the PlayStation home console brand until the release of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on the Nintendo GameCube in 2003. Significant changes to the franchise were introduced with the 7th title. Gone were the 2D sprites and pixel art and restrictive 8-channel sound design that remained mainstays during the Super Nintendo era. The series now featured fully 3D battle scenes, 3D character models, pre-rendered backgrounds on the overworld, and CD quality audio with an expanded 24-channel sound sequencer. This was only the beginning of the evolution of the Final Fantasy franchise, as it took on a more modern and even futuristic presentation, though that did not stop them from returning to their fantasy roots now and then. This new presentation, combined with the serious tone of the game, signaled a shift towards more mature stories for an older audience, almost to distance itself from the cartoony, childish association that surrounded the Nintendo brand. This was a fresh start as the audience had grown up, so it was time that the games also grew up as well. So what exactly made the 7th game so special that it left such an impact on an entire generation of players? From the moment you hit New Game, you are transported to the dark, gritty metropolis of Midgar. The city is a stark difference from the ones found in the Super Nintendo games. The color palette is filled with dark blues, grays, and blacks, with bright yellow lights and an eerie glowing green to make it feel alive while hinting at something a bit more ominous waiting for you. Thick, dark clouds cover the skyline with smoke and pollution filling the air. The only other colors you really see during the entire introduction highlight a woman selling flowers in the streets. Finally, our hero arrives by train, leaping off the roof and landing in a pose that would make Disney and Marvel call their lawyers. The intro nails the dark, more serious tone the series is headed, and assures the players that this is not the same Final Fantasy they thought they knew. In fact, this intro is so memorable, Square Enix has recreated it on at least 3 separate occasions. Although the story still follows the classic structure of a JRPG, the mature take on it sets it apart from its contemporaries and even a huge chunk of the company's own back catalog. The story begins with our hero, Cloud Strife, aiding a group of environmental resistance fighters, known as Avalanche, take down a reactor belonging to the powerful Shinra Electric Power Company, to ease the pollution and strain that it's causing on their planet. And who said politics never had a place in video games? The cast is filled with diverse, colorful characters fully rendered in 3D, although you might say that the overworld characters make them a bit more adorable and cute than the more realistic in-battle counterparts would like. The towns and locales you visit reflect the themes of environmentalism, social class discrimination, and genetic experimentation explored in the narrative. Heck, it's one of the most prominent examples of a game killing off one of their main characters early on in the game. I don't want to spoil it for you, but I bet you could take a stab at it and figure out who it is quite easily. As the plot slowly uncovers the mystery of Jenova, we witness Sephiroth's descent into madness and hatred, seeing him evolve from an intriguing, prominent figure in Cloud's past into a formidable villain hell-bent on causing quite a bit of bother. And I can't forget to mention the music. The Final Fantasy series is no stranger to memorable compositions, and Final Fantasy VII didn't buck that trend. The battle themes are filled with triumphant energy, with the boss battle theme, One Winged Angel, being one of my favorite tracks in the franchise. Every location in the game has its own theme that provides a unique personality and feel that just hearing the song can take you back to your first playthrough. So naturally, players all over the world became enamored with Final Fantasy VII, leaving them hungry for more stories from this world. Over the course of the next decade, Square delivered in the form of the Compilation of Final Fantasy VII, a sub-series of sorts that spans several forms of media and game consoles. 5 entries were released, although one has since been retconned out and another was a Japan-only mobile title, so I'll be skipping them due to their lack of importance and lack of an available official English translation. Our focus will be on Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, and Crisis Core. Initially, the compilation was intended to only have a single entry, Advent Children Final Fantasy VII, until it was decided more entries were necessary to tell all the stories they had planned. The story picks up about 2 years after the events of Final Fantasy VII. With Jenova and Sephiroth now out of the picture, a strange disease is now plaguing the world known as geostigma, with no known cure. We see the introduction of new antagonists Kadaj, Laz, and Yazoo, 3 brothers calling themselves the Remnants of Sephiroth. The Remnants of Sephiroth have one goal: obtain their mother's head and bring about the reunion, an event sparked by the theory that the cells of Jenova that were separated and implanted into other beings would eventually be driven to return to her body. To be honest, I've seen the movie several times and I even keep a UMD copy by my desk at all times to marvel at, but I cannot for the life of me recall most of the plot in this film. It's packed with references to the original game and characters and one of the most hilarious dubs I have ever seen.
Dilly dally shilly shally. Dilly dally shilly shally.
I think she wants you to move on, man.
I wouldn't say this entry really does much to expand upon the established storyline, but heck if it wasn't hyped to see Cloud, Tifa, and the gang kick some ass in full CGI glory. An updated director's cut of the film was eventually released prior to Final Fantasy XIII, bringing the series into the HD format and added new scenes that attempted to fix continuity errors. At the very least, we were able to see 3 optional characters have a bit more screen time as they were absent from the FMVs of the original, additionally giving us a glimpse into their lives after the final battle. One character in particular even got a starring role in his own game set a year after these events. Finally, I get to talk about Dirge of Cerberus, a title that sounds more like an entry in the Castlevania series than in Final Fantasy. This game is similar to Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance in a sense that both titles are the furthest into the future in their own respective universes, yet have significant changes in gameplay and tone to really set them apart from their predecessors. This was actually the first Final Fantasy VII related game I played. It wasn't until several years later that I attempted my first playthrough of the original due to the scarcity of the title in the mid-2000s. Dirge of Cerberus is set a year after the events of Advent Children, introducing many new character settings and a brand new story that aims to unravel the mystery of Vincent's past in one of the most convoluted stories in the series. The game stars optional side character and part-time Hot Topic vampire Vincent Valentine as he shoots his way through minutes of gameplay to pave the way for more and more dialogue-heavy cutscenes. Really, this title is a shooter-based action RPG, but the gameplay is broken up by so many cutscenes it's hard to even call it action anything. To be fair, when you do get a chance to cut loose and have a lengthy gameplay section, it's decently fun in its own right, but those sections are few and far between and quite a bit frustrating as well. Vincent's trademark sidearm returns along with his ability to transform into various monster forms he obtained through limit breaks in the original game. The Japanese version even featured a multiplayer mode with its own storyline accessed through Square's Play Online that was sadly cut and replaced with a mission mode in the West due to the unpopular nature of the terrible, obnoxious launcher associated with Final Fantasy XI. Thematically, the game is a huge departure from Final Fantasy VII, opting for darker themes such as death and existence with a skosh of horror thrown in. Now, this is easily the least memorable or successful of the main three releases. The story is nonsensical, the gameplay is restrictive, and outside of the art direction, it's completely forgettable. Just say the words Dirge of Cerberus to a hardcore fan, you'll either be met with a blank stare or be silenced immediately. Not unlike reminding Parasite Eve fans that the third birthday exists. Stop. Now, the final installment in the compilation is one of my favorite handheld RPGs of all time. Crisis Core is a prequel that sees us control Zack and live out his life as a member of Soldier. Here we learn more about his relationships with Aerith and Cloud and how their fates became intertwined. Again, we see the return of Sephiroth alongside Genesis, a high-ranking Soldier member who cameoed in Dirge of Cerberus, credited only as G, as well as a new mentor character named Angeal, the original owner of the Buster Sword. The game's introductory cutscene actually mimics the train scene of Final Fantasy VII, deepening the link between Zack and Cloud. Due to the portable nature of the system, this PSP game featured a mission structure with many story and optional missions alongside cameos from characters such as Yuffie and the Turks. The gameplay is an interesting mix of action and turn-based RPG mechanics with limit breaks returning in the form of a slot machine that spins as you pull off successful physical, skill, and magic attacks. Each limit break is tied to important characters in Zack's life and plays a prominent role in the finale of the game that could, and did, bring a grown man to tears. Out of all the titles in the compilation, I find this one to be the most important in regards to the legacy of the series. It expands on fan favorite Zack while giving more screen time to side and optional characters from the original. It's a shame this never left the PSP, as I stand by the quality of the title to this very day despite some of the more confusing additions that created more questions than answers. Overall, the compilation of Final Fantasy VII is a mixed bag in terms of quality, with sequels and prequels that were intended to flesh out the more mysterious aspects. However, they simultaneously created a whole new set of plot holes and retcons that span several console generations, and a plethora of additional forms of media that parallel the Kingdom Hearts franchise. Oh, Kingdom Hearts, there's always some way to make you relatable despite your headache-inducing existence. Due to this, it became almost necessary for a remake to address all these inconsistencies and provide a single concise storyline that draws from the decades of content released in its wake. Outside of the compilation proper, characters from the series have appeared in numerous titles in the years to follow. One of the earliest examples of this comes from Airgaze God Bless the Ring, a 3D fighting game on the PS1 published by Squaresoft that featured Cloud, Tifa, Zack, Sephiroth, Yuffie, and Vincent as guest characters. The game itself has no relation to the Final Fantasy series at all, and these cameos are naturally not canon. Later, Kingdom Hearts would see the first incarnation of voice acting for many Final Fantasy characters, spotlighting Yuffie and Aerith working with Final Fantasy VIII hero Squall, called Leon in the game, with Cloud returning as a prominent character during the Olympus Coliseum world. Sephiroth, voiced by the one and only Lance Bass, would become a secret optional boss that would test the mettle of anyone who dared mock his time in NSYNC. Cloud, Sephiroth, and Tifa would once again return in Dissidia Final Fantasy as playable fighters, with Aerith being relegated to merely an assist character. And even more recently, Cloud would debut as a new challenger in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, subsequently returning to the most recent release on Switch. It's undeniable how much of an impact these characters had in gaming culture, with each cameo being applauded and making fans more and more thirsty for a return to Midgar. Now, the next logical step for Square Enix would be to finally remake the original game to address the new canon these stories seem to create. In 2005, on the stage of Sony's E3 presentation, an in-engine recreation of the opening scene of Final Fantasy VII was presented to the audience to showcase the prowess of the new system. Although this was never meant to be more than a tech demo, it fueled rumors and cries from fans to make this a reality. This version of the game never came to fruition, sadly, and it wasn't until nearly another decade later on the same stage that a proper remake of the game was announced as a reality. Nearly 2 decades after the release of Final Fantasy VII, Square Enix finally unveiled their plans for a remake. This game would simply be titled Final Fantasy VII Remake and be released on current generation of consoles, specifically the PlayStation 4, at least initially. This game would be a distinct entity from everything before it, no longer bearing the mark of the compilation, nor be a completely faithful remake of the original game. Here is where the fan reaction turned a bit distressed with each new bit of information, causing more confusion and worry about how this beloved title would be remade. Soon after the announcement, it was confirmed the game would not simply be one game. Instead, it would be released episodically in a similar manner to how the Final Fantasy XIII sub-series handled its expanded story. Now, we still have no clue how many episodes there will be, nor how long it will take to complete the story. This has been a valid criticism of the handling of the remake, as the first episode alone only covers the Midgar portion, which isn't even the entire first disc of the original. It's also my least favorite part personally, but that's another story. Another criticism is the complete reimagining of the battle system. I mentioned before the original is a traditional turn-based RPG that allows players to take their time in battle to strategize. This remake has removed the turn-based combat entirely, although there is a similar turn-based mode for the game that was included in the demo, but it's locked to a single difficulty and feels more of a pittance for fans than the intended gameplay style. With Square Enix hot off the heels of Final Fantasy XV, the criticisms and worries fans have are not unfounded. Final Fantasy XV launched in 2016 after a decade of troubled development, during which it was known as Final Fantasy Versus 13. Out of the gates, the game was already riddled with spin-offs, tie-ins, DLC plans, real-world product placement, and poor design decisions that forced the developers to go back and tweak many aspects of the game after launch. The game was re-released about a year later with a Royal Edition and an announcement of more DLC and tie-ins, some of which were eventually cancelled due to financial concerns from the publisher, leaving the story effectively unfinished. Not everyone was disappointed with this game, but as a buyer of the title at launch, I can tell you it was easily one of the most uninspired and dreadfully boring entries in the series. Now, this is the current state of Final Fantasy as a series and Square Enix as a developer. It is important to look at the treatment of 15 in order to adjust our expectations, as they are now handling the most iconic game in the franchise. The massive changes the remake would be implementing garnered quite a bit of backlash, but as I stated in my video about remakes, the faithfulness of the original is not necessarily important to success. The primary concern players should have is the greed that seems to surround the episodic nature of the game. We've already seen how Square Enix is not above canning development of their flagship series if it doesn't appear profitable enough. And the fact that they have no idea how many episodes there will be, that raises so many red flags that there is a probable chance we may never see this remake completed. They may drag out the story for more entries if sales stay consistent, or even rush through or remove iconic scenes entirely if they want to cut down on development time and costs. This wouldn't be the first time such a thing has happened in recent memory, and I'm looking at you, Capcom. How do you remove memorable bits of an already short game? But maybe my worries are completely unfounded. As I finally have the game in my hands, it's only fair to see what they've done so far and give them some benefit of the doubt. So, having put about 8 or so hours into the remake, I've returned to share my thoughts. Overall, I'm surprised so much attention to detail has been put into the game thus far. The gameplay feels solid, although kinda basic, and reminds me more of Kingdom Hearts than I'd like. The expanded content feels natural, and graphically the art design is very beautiful, just don't pay too much attention to textures that aren't on the main characters. Once you leave the demo area, the hand-holding I felt was too prevalent in the demo lessons, as they seemingly understand that you don't need constant reminders how to do basic combat. Now, I have not completed the game yet, but I do feel positive about future entries in the remake saga, though I'm still not really understanding why they need an as of yet undetermined amount of games to tell this story based on where I left off. The new content does make the game feel fresh and new again, spotlighting side characters like the Avalanche Trio to make their presence feel more than just throwaway. I don't want to spoil too much, so I'll keep it at that, as I think fans should experience this game on their own, to form their own opinion, as Final Fantasy VII is such a personal game for so many. I just hope that they don't take advantage of their fan base and string them along for half-baked sequels in the future. A strong lead does give me hope, but as we've seen before, even within the Final Fantasy VII universe, less is more, and Square Enix doesn't always understand that concept. Honestly, I just hope we see more content from the Crisis Core era during this saga, or at least give me an HD remaster and I'll call it even. Based on what I've seen on Twitter and just in social media and in my chat on Twitch, some people are complaining about the end of this game, but I have not been there yet, so I really can't talk much to it. And now we end our journey with a deeper understanding of the legacy of Final Fantasy VII. The compilation titles, though convoluted and confusing at times, were interesting ways to return to a single title in a timeless franchise. It also highlighted how popularity and fan response can make a franchise that treats each entry as a unique entity in an anthology its own diverse series. As we move forward with the remake saga, we need to be aware of the pitfalls that befell Final Fantasy XV, and be prepared to be disappointed but remain optimistic as the initial entry shows much promise. It's good to keep in mind that new players, especially from younger generations, will be experiencing this story for the first time in a form that appeals to them more. That's the magical thing about remakes that I tend to forget. We get to see new faces join the fan base and see growth in a series that has had many highs and lows over the years. Just remember to not be a jerk, and definitely don't start gatekeeping new players from enjoying the game. Personally, I enjoyed revisiting each game while putting this together, as I've rekindled my interest in returning to Crisis Core and even the original game, as I've never actually finished it myself. I'm eager to get back to the remake, as it's been kind of a bonding experience for me and my girlfriend, and she's never been able to finish the original game herself. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this ride as much as I did, and if so, don't forget to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notified when the next Retrosaurus comes around. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on the new remake might be, as I'm eager to see how other players are finding the game. Until next time, you can find me all over the internet as KyoryuHunter, which is easier to spell than it is to say. Additionally, the series is supported through Patreon, so check the link in the description if you'd like to support it. And with that, my name is Louie, and thank you so much for watching this episode of Retrosaurus.